Welcome aboard. I'm Captain Rick. This is Yacht Elf, the oldest active racing yacht in America. A real challenge to sail because there's over a mile of strings on this boat. And the bigger challenge is cooking in this galley. It's a small, tight galley, and I'm a big boy. But if I don't keep the crew fed, they get mutinous. And I don't want that on my watch. We've been learning so much about the boats here that, like the Bug-Eye, that its main purpose was catching oysters and this type of thing. The Skipjacks did a lot of oystering and that type of thing. I think it's important to try a few of the Chesapeake's white gold, the oyster. So what I'm going to do is to make some oyster stew here today, and I'm going to take you through. It's a quick and easy recipe that I think you'll really love. And the first thing I do is start with a couple pads of butter in the bottom of the pan. We'll get that melted on low heat. You don't want it too hot or you'll burn your butter. And what I do is to add my ingredients of onion and then celery and then just a variety of other items as I'll show you. So let me just get this going and just be a moment. I found it very interesting to hear all the stories about the boats that were here on the bay that were designed specifically for the Chesapeake Bay just to go out and catch those oysters. Okay, here we go. I love a little sweet Vidalia onion. Sweet Vidalia is something that adds a real nice flavor to the oysters. And we're gonna just get this going in the pot. It's a little fine, reasonably finely diced. It doesn't have to be too fine, but I'm just gonna put it in the pot. A little bit of olive oil on the side there and just get that kind of going. Don't need a whole lot, just need to keep it from sticking or burning. Gonna get things lit up here, and this will be going on medium heat today. And I'm going to turn it back. I don't want it to get too far along. Okay. What I do next, I'll put the lid on. Of course, let me get all that onion in there. I like to take the hearts of celery, the leaves and everything. It adds a real nice dimension to the flavor. And I'm going to pare down to about that much and take and trim off the end. I love those leaves. They really kind of talk to you flavor-wise. So we're going to set that aside. And then just kind of do a little fine chopping of this. Maybe get rid of one of those. Don't need too much. We're just making a little batch. The crew is ashore on shore leave, so we're going to just do our own thing today. And there's only so much I can eat at a time. I don't like wasting. Don't want to get fat either. Okay, just a little quick cut up. This doesn't take too long because there's not that many ingredients to prepare. And I think you're going to find it's very simple. And you can get oysters like at Big Al's or anywhere along the Chesapeake Bay in season. And of course they stress the months with the R in it. And oystering season is just starting and I love it. This is a great time to be here in the bay. That's just getting started to cook. And I'm going to put the celery right in on top of that. Just going to hit the pan. Sometimes that's a little difficult when we're rocking and rolling here. Okay. All right, I'm going to kind of move it around a little bit. And next thing I want to do, now that they're just starting to cook, I'm going to get the oysters in. And they are some just beautiful little oysters that I enjoy. So I'm going to get those out, get those in, got a little cup of them. And Chesapeake Bay oysters, like I said before, are the white gold of the Chesapeake. I'm not even going to cut them up because I like mine in good size. I love oysters. My big problem is when I do oysters, I have trouble getting them to the pan because I like to eat them, and I put the juice and everything in. And that's going to cook for a few minutes. You don't want to do too long. The oysters take about 5 minutes, and I like to judge how they're cooking by the edge of their of the oyster kind of tends to curl a little, and I'll show you before they curl the difference. Okay. Now these are just put in. They're not curling, but the little edges of where they attach to the shell would tend to curl just a little bit, and that's when the oyster is just about right. So I'm going to let that get to that point. It'll just take about 4 or 5 minutes, and then we'll take and put our other flavors in. I've got Old Bay I'm going to use. I've got a little bit of Lea & Perrin thick, and I think I'll do that Old Bay and Lea & Perrin right now while the oysters are just getting right. Okay, I'm gonna put a few dollops in. That's it, right about there. Don't need too much. And same with the Old Bay. I'm gonna do a little bit on the pour, okay, but I'm really careful not to do too much. This seems to have gotten a little firm, so I might need to open it up a little. There we go. I'm going to just add a little bit and then taste it when it's all done. And if I need a little more, I'll add a little more at the end. And I like to dress it, so to speak, with a little bit, and that works out nicely. So we're just going to let that cook a moment. Let me stir it all around, get those flavors all working together. Okay. Oh boy, that looks good. A couple more minutes and we'll be ready to add the liquids, and we'll be in good shape. So I really enjoy watching the boats come and go. I enjoy actually taking a ride. We took a great ride with Ed Farley on the Skipjack H Krentz the other day, and he's a wealth of knowledge about not just the oyster, but the Chesapeake Bay, the watershed, and things that are happening in the watershed, and all the different things that we're trying to do to help the bay.
The oystering laws in Maryland are to make us inefficient the way we harvest oysters, so there's always oysters left for the future. So by law, since 1865, we have to drag from a sailing vessel. The power boats that go out for oysters use tongs, and they actually dig by hand the bottom. And I had a friend who once used tongs 32 feet long. Can you imagine controlling 32-foot long wooden handles down to the bottom, digging the bottom, pulling that all the way up loaded with oysters? I mean, that guy, you don't want to arm wrestle with him over at C Street. Okay. Anyways, we're going to talk about that when we get out from here. We have a push boat on the back, which is like a miniature tugboat, and we will use that to get away from the pier. You only eat oysters in the months with the letter R, because the European oyster, when it reproduces, the baby oyster, or the larvae, was inside the bigger female oysters waiting to be mature, and she would let them go and they would metamorphose into an oyster. Well, they figured out with magnifying glasses by 1300 that grittiness wasn't sand, it was the future crop, so you do not eat them. And English law prevailed in the early colonial period, and so when the Maryland and Virginias found all these oysters that grew everywhere in the bay, it was actually named after the Virginia colony, Crassostrea virginica, and it's the same species that grows in the Gulf of Mexico, Apalachicola, Georgia, the Carolinas, all the way to Canada on the East Coast is one species. Some people like them saltier, some people like them less salty, and the Chesapeake Bay oysters were famous because the water gets so warm, but all that fertilizer that comes into the bay, it grows algae, and oysters eat algae. So the Chesapeake oysters are fatter than most other oysters, and they were famous for that plump, sweet flavor they would get. The trick to shucking an oyster is getting the knife between the top shell and the bottom shell. there's one adductor muscle that holds it tightly closed, and I'm going to find that adductor muscle, and when I do that, if I haven't mangled the oyster up, the oyster's still alive. And you can also watch the oyster's heartbeat right there. Is
it alive?
Yeah, it just went down, the heart did. There it comes, it's coming back up.
Check his blood pressure.
Yep, check his blood pressure. Now, an oyster has a 2-chamber heart. So right there, oh, the heart's beginning to fill up again, right over to the side here. It's in defib right now. This little bulge in there is the heart.
Yeah.
And then the gills,
Lovely.
to get
I love those
oysters,
things.
to get oxygen, those are the gills, these little folds here. And their mouth is right here.
Oh.
And they'll filter about 50 gallons of water a day.
When you come to St. Michael's, you really need to stop and say hi to Ed Farley and take a ride with Ed. He does skipjack charters that are really quite nice. Let me see how we're doing with the oysters. Oh, about 1 more minute and we'll have them ready. This is a fast recipe. The onion and the celery just kind of bring the flavor out of the oyster in my book. I've taken and looked at the Lighthouse cookbook that they printed here at the Chesapeake Bay Maritime Museum, and I took their bug-eye oyster stew recipe and I kind of tweaked it a little bit. I like theirs, but I like mine a little bit better. Okay, so the recipe book, or cookbook I should say, is on sale here at the museum, and if you haven't seen it, you really should take a look and check out some of the recipes and try them. They are excellent. Here we go. I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. Everything's all kind of steamy and boiling, and you can see the edges of the oyster are just starting to curl a little bit. It's kind of a neat little way of telling when they're done. These have only been cooking about 4 or 5 minutes, and that's the way I like it. And that's why I say it's very quick and easy. And I'm just about ready to add the finishing ingredients. Okay, I like to do the fat-free half and half for my oyster stew. And we're going to get that all in there. Now, you really have to be careful that you don't boil this because it'll all curdle. And I've had times when, yes, I've curdled my oyster stew, but it doesn't ruin the flavor. It just ruins the texture and that type of thing. And I like it when it's nice and creamy and not curdled. Okay, here we go. Now all we're doing is letting it very lightly cook, and then it is done. Basically, the cooking is pretty much done. We're basically warming what we just added. About another 2 minutes, and we'll be taking a moment and trying some of the Chesapeake's finest oyster stew. Here at Chesapeake Bay Maritime Museum in St. Michael's, Maryland, has a lot of different artifacts that you can look at and touch and just go around the museum and be part of an educational program. I want to introduce you to Langley Shook, the president of Chesapeake Bay Maritime Museum. He's going to tell us a couple important items about the museum. Langley?
Thank you, Rick. We're happy to have you and ELF as home port at our museum, 18-acre outdoor campus on the St. Michael's Harbor, and welcome everyone to come and visit. When you get to St. Michael's, make sure that the Maritime Museum is your first stop.
Okay, what I want to do is show you the different types of oyster tongs. The ones that have just a kind of narrow tonging area are called snips. This is where the oysterman is in shallow water. He can look down and see the oysters he wants to get because the water's clear, he's in shallow water. The length of the poles are not very long. He can go down and snip the oysters he wants off the bottom. This is a little bit larger oyster snip, as you can see from this one, and I'll demonstrate them in just a moment. And this is the oyster tongs, where it's a lot broader basket so that the oysterman uses these in a little bit deeper water where he can't see the bottom. And they work the bottom like this, and then they close them up and then bring them up and bring them up and bring them up. Now, if in fact this is a full tong, it would weigh 20 to 30 pounds. And as the oysterman does this day in, day out, several times a day, you may take and do this 300 or 400 or 500 times a day, up and down, up and down. They build some big muscles, I'll tell you. Their upper body strength is incredible. You don't want to get in a fight with an oysterman that does this tonguing, because he's going to win. So the snips have a shorter length to the pole, as you can see. I'm going to demonstrate using the oyster snips. Say, for example, I see one right there. I'm going to go down and get just that one and bring it up and set it up here on the dock here, and I've got it. Okay? Looks as though we might have an actual live oyster here. Nope. Yes, there is a live one here. Although it's small, there's a live one here and one in here. This one is a little difficult to tell, but what we do next, if we're actually doing this professionally, we have the oyster hammer, which I'm going to show you over here. And we'll take this oyster hammer using this point here to break off the oyster that we want. We throw back the empty shells so that the spat for the next series of oysters could settle in the shell and then grow another oyster. We use this area here to measure the oyster size, and we may have a legal one right there because it is of size. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of the tools that we use for the oysters. Okay, we have some live oysters in here. They are a little small. Maybe that one's large enough and maybe that one's large enough. We have to open them up with the hammer and then measure them, and I think we would then be able to have a few for dinner. But that gives you a little bit of idea. He's a little smaller than the legal 3.5 inch size. There's a couple here that are small, but we'll let them go for another day because we want them to fatten up and get big and be tasty. And this is one that's alive also, and you can see it's inside this little shell. To open it, we take a oyster knife and pry it open, and of course this is too small, but we'll let him go for another day, but I'll demonstrate opening an oyster at a later time. Needs just a little more of my spice and a little bit more Lea & Perrine Worcestershire sauce. So that's important to do as you go, to not overdo your flavors because you can't take them out. It's easy to put them in. Okay, we'll start with that. And add just a little. I think maybe it's a matter of this atmosphere, the moisture, so much moisture in the atmosphere, in the maritime atmosphere, that all the salt in here tends to want to collect the moisture and make like one big lump here sometimes. So maybe I need to put some in my hand. That's more like it. There we go. That's about what I think I need, and I'm just going to kind of put this in and then stir it all around and give it another taste, and then we'll be done. Oh boy, this is going to be good. This is going to be good either way. But the best part of this taste is, voila, big piece of oyster. Let me try this. Great. I think what I'll do is I'll top it with a little bit more Old Bay when I get ready to serve it, as I finish it. And it is just about a half a minute. So the Bug Eye cookbook, or I should say Bug Eye recipe, is a very good one that I enjoy, but we'll just go with this one today and see what you think. We'll do a comparison. You do yours, you do mine, put them side by side and do a taste test. This is wonderful. Well, here we have, in very short order, a pan full of oyster stew that is just so yummy. This is great on a cold winter day or fall day or in the spring. I love it anytime. Just in the summer, you don't usually see your oysters harvested because that's not a time to eat oysters here in Chesapeake Bay. Okay, so here we have it. Get another paper towel. And we're just going to shake a little more on the top. Okay, just a little shake on top. You don't need much, just kind of finishes it. And here we have a cup of oyster stew. It's a good way to serve it up. I like it in a cup versus a bowl while I'm aboard because for me it makes it a lot easier. It's less apt to spill and I can control it quite well. So some people like to have oyster crackers, and they're kind of little crackers you put in your oyster stew or eat alongside. But however you enjoy your stew, bon appetit.
Damn it! I've had enough. This is it.